so much. I see some 27 of you right now on my screen, but some 90 plus of you registered. And I know a lot of you are in between, you're teaching, classes. And so I know that this size will keep on increasing within the next 10 minutes. Very quickly, before I proceed further, there are two things that I really want you to prepare. Number one is to make sure that your department is written before your name. We are going to do an interactive breakout rooms. And for that, we want to group faculty together by their discipline. So it would help us make the groups in a better and efficient manner if you write your name. So if you write I think on the right side of the screen, there are three dots on your own picture. And there you will see rename, an option for rename. Please rename, like I have done, CLT, Ruxana Zia. So that's how we would expect you all to rename yourselves for this session. And the other thing that I wanted to alert is that we will record this session. And so also that you all know. And very important point, I hope that you have brought a question with you that you have used in the past or intend to use it for the present exams. That will help us work together on how to draft better questions. Like you can see that the topic says developing and assessing higher order questions for open book exams. And we have been writing questions since ever and ever, and for exams. And of course, we do a lot of questioning in the classroom where a discussion has to happen. So the session today targets open book exams, which are no different in terms of developing higher order questions. Either way, but they become more important for open book exams, because in that way you are making sure that anything that can be checked out of resources available to students in books on the net becomes redundant for them, and they have to apply their own critical thinking to respond to that question. So that is why we are taking this session as a very crucial question in how you take your open book exams for the fall session. The session on Monday, 8th February was remarkable because it put the whole different types of open book exams into perspective, and it gave very quick guidelines for how to minimize cheating with all those types of exams. And all those exams, except even MCQs, would demand higher order thinking skills on part of the student, and they can be framed that way. The only thing that in MCQs you cannot aim for is the highest level of critical thinking, that is of creating, where creation happens, or a student comes up with something that's very original. Um, so that's the only thing that MCQs do not do. But short of that, analyzing, comparisons, comprehension can be checked very well. And these are all higher order thinking skills as well. So without much ado, I would like to invite our panel. We have the first one to take, the session with you is Mavish Raza. We all know her. I'm not going to introduce. They're all, great faculty. Elizabeth, Ryan Brasher. He will join a bit late. So Mavish and Elizabeth later on are going to work in the breakout rooms with you to sort of work through the sessions of developing questions, and then how do you assess those questions and making of rubrics. So over to you, Mavish, and then of course Elizabeth, and thank you so much for your time and effort.
Thank you so much, Roxana. I am just going to share my screen with the audience. All right. So I hope that everyone can see my screen. So today, as Roxana has taken you through the basic objective of the session, that we are going to talk about how to create questions in order to promote critical thinking. Very quickly, I'm just going to run you all through the brief that Roxana had already prepared. It was very helpful. I've extracted some core information from that brief for those of you who have who didn't have a time to go through it. So this, this presentation is going to help you in understanding that what was the brief all about and what are we going to do today in this session. So firstly, let's see what does critical thinking look like. It looks like something that is a systematic process of thinking, of conceptualizing information, reasoning, making meaning out of what students have learned or what you as a teacher expect them to present as part of their student work product. Secondly, we're always talking about reflection. We're always saying that questions should be of reflective nature. Now, what is reflection? Reflection is basically, it's an active process where participants or where learners make meaning out of the knowledge. They conceptualize that knowledge in their own context, in a given problem, in a given issue, and make meaning of their understanding, and then present it in a logical manner that shows that they are able to draw conclusions on based on the gained information. Then students should be able to analyze and evaluate different sources of information. They should be able to identify what is right and what is not correct, what holds value to go into the argument and what doesn't hold enough value. And lastly, the writing or the process of reporting one's understanding has to be coherent and logical. It has to present the meaning of the knowledge in a systematic manner. Now, how do we promote critical thinking? We can do that various ways. One is that you provide students the thinking time. That is usually, that usually takes place while the teaching is in action. We can encourage students to make use of the lecture notes. We engage them in collaborative exercises like peer discussion or working in a group, or we give them a situational question. We give them time to think about the answer before they give us an answer. Secondly, we design a question in such a manner that it promotes critical thinking. This is the focus of our of today's training session. So we basically engage students in reflective tasks. We give them or we curate the teaching in such a manner that it promotes thinking about their own thinking about what they have learned, thinking about logic, reasoning their choices, evaluating, analyzing the information, and choosing out the best possible sources of information to support their answer. And lastly, we teach through problem solving. That's another way of promoting critical thinking. So because today's session is rooted in designing different questions to promote critical thinking, so I'm quickly going to talk a little bit about how can we design questions to promote critical thinking. There are two main frameworks which Roxana also has talked about in her brief, and I strongly suggest everybody to go through it because it's a very, very well written and comprehensive document that enables you to understand the technicalities of how to design or phrase questions. One approach to this is Socratic questioning, and the other is Bloom's taxonomy. Today, we are going to you can take help from the brief while we work on the while we work in the breakout rooms. Very quickly, a quick recap of the Socratic questions. These are the 6 different types that the teachers may use to engage students in critical thinking and to promote to promote engaging in critical thinking as a systematic process. So basically, some questions where we encourage students to talk about reasoning, some questions where we talk about what makes them believe so, with what sort of evidence is there for them to believe it. So it's mainly rooted into their own understanding of a concept, and it becomes difficult for them to cheat something if they are not aware of the supporting information to go along with their answer. So what do we have to do now? We Suleiman is going to break you in and send you into breakout rooms. You have about 15 minutes for this exercise. You have to select one question as a group. I hope that you all have brought in an assessment question. If you do not have a question ready with you, you can readily think of a student learning outcome and design a question around it. Rephrase or reconstruct the question to promote a critical thinking and come back for a discussion. Now, how do you rephrase and restructure the question to promote critical thinking? I have created a checklist which basically saturates into the Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm going to share it with all of you. Suleiman is going to share it with all of you. As you will be broken into the or sent out into the breakout groups, we will share that checklist with you. So the question that you have focus on the checklist that I have prepared and see if your question meets the requirement. If it does not, how would you rephrase, or what details would you add to the question to uplift its quality? That's all what you have to do, and then we come back for a group discussion and we share our thoughts and also analyze your question realistically and be honest that on which level, how many areas were lacking in the question, and that's all what this activity focuses on. So Suleiman, over to you. If you could please send the participants in the breakout rooms, and you have 15 minutes for this exercise. I hope you'll be able to accomplish it. Hello everyone, welcome back. Let all the groups return. Everyone is going to return back to the main session in about 10 seconds. So and then we'll take responses and we'll discuss your experience by talking about just the fact that how do you feel that the question quality has improved after this exercise? Were you able to uplift the quality of the question? Were you able to add some value to it? Or, I mean, just share your experiences. So we'll take random responses. Who'd like to go first? You can raise your hand.
I'm sure Rehan has something to say. Rehan?
Sir, please unmute your mic. Your mic is still on the mute mode.
Yes, I raised a question that I thought is a critical thinking question about trachea and vessels, two kinds of cells which are used for conduction of water. And some plants have become more successful using one kind of cell. So the question was how you will say that a certain kind of cells has a selective advantage compared to the other. So this was the question I had. But there were no comments, and I don't know. But I think that this is a analysis question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sir, did you get the checklist that we shared?
No,
Because
no, I did not.
Okay, so we are going to share the checklist with you once more, and you can have you can compare different aspects of your question in the light of the given domains which are listed there in the checklist. Anyone else who had received the checklist and who any group who was able to change the quality or change the phrasing of the question to enhance the notion of critical thinking? Any one of you who were able to find some meaning in the activity and gain something from it? Yes, Daniel, if you can please unmute yourself and speak and share your thoughts with us.
Yes, thank you. So we were in a group with religious studies professors. So we focused on the starting question was in what ways do rational approaches to religion encourage faith? And we thought of a couple of ways that this might be this question. We might change this question to address some further critical thinking aspects. So, for example, there was the suggestion to focus on a specific example. So, for example, in what way does Aristotle's approach to, or Aristotle's arguments about supreme cause, how do they relate to religious studies, or how are they an example of rational approaches to religion promoting faith? And another was to include a comparison between two different approaches. So, for example, in what is the difference between a rational approach and such as Aristotle's, and a non-rational approach such as a mystical approach to religion, and in what different ways do they each promote faith?
Thank you so much. So, Daniel, my question is that were you able to rephrase the question? What did you find? Which aspects were missing from the question?
Right. So I thought that initially the aspect 5, comparison of different viewpoints, interpretations, and perspectives, was missing, and that's one that we managed to include, I think, with perhaps both of those changes. And then the clarification of concept, number 1, was missing. I think that would be clarified by including a specific example.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to share their experience? Maybe we can take an example from logic subjects, mathematics, or computer studies. Anyone here who would like to share their findings with us?
I don't think there are any takers for that. I think perhaps we could wind it up. Just a few key points.
Yeah. So basically the crux of this activity and what we wanted you to practice is that if you develop the baseline question and then mindfully you go through different aspects of the question and you look at it spread out over the Bloom's taxonomy or even the Socratic questioning technique. At the end, when we keep on rephrasing the question, we come up with a question of a quality that is promising enough to promote critical thinking. Some aspects of the question, if rephrased in a proper manner or phrased in a proper manner, they do ensure that students engage in critical thinking. With this, I hand over the session to my co-presenter. Thank you so much, Roxana, for giving this opportunity to me to bring this activity for the participants. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Elizabeth? Unmute yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I will share my screen. Hopefully everyone will be able to see okay. So now that we have created a question, or at least started to create a question, we're now going to look at how do we measure kind of success on the part of your student for that question. It's certainly when we look at the difference between multiple choice versus a short answer or an essay or one of these kinds of longer kind of questions, one of the problems that we come up against is that it becomes a lot of work to mark that question. And it can be quite daunting at the end of the semester. You have a lot of things going on to then add a 500-word essay question or, something that's a bit more tedious to mark. So what I'm going to talk about is how we can create rubrics that help us to both quickly, rapidly, and easily mark those questions that we have come up with. So we're going to look at the question that you just now have adjusted or changed and see how could it be evaluated in an easier fashion than kind of going through and having to mark each one and go back and all of that. So we're looking at creating rubrics to evaluate these kinds of questions. So I'm going to be very, very quick, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms to see if you can kind of create a rubric for your question that you have as a group. So the first kind of thing that you have to think about is what areas are you needing to evaluate? So those areas can be anything really. And a lot of that depends on your learning objectives for your course. So if you go back and you look at your learning objectives, oftentimes there will be things like clarity of concepts, that can the student kind of express the concepts in a clear and constructive fashion. You might have something about level of sophistication in evaluating theories. You might have referencing, different styles of referencing that are important in your learning objectives. There can be any number of learning objectives that you have for your course, but those learning objectives can actually kind of highlight for you what areas, what competencies you're looking for in this final kind of exam. So the first question is what areas of competence, or what areas of what areas do I want to evaluate? And so I often, when I create a rubric, I put the areas of competency on the left side in a column. We then need to think about what levels of competency would there be? So a lot of times we might create a rubric that has, you get 1 mark if you do this, 2 marks if you do this, 3 marks if you do that. But actually what can be more helpful for us is to have kind of a proportion or a percentage of the kind of areas. If you think about our grading what's an A, what's a B, what's a C, what's a D, what are the pluses and minuses within that. So I often create levels according to kind of percentages. And I often also give that some kind of qualitative marker that this is really exceptional. This is like A work. This is something that's somewhere in the range of B- to B+. This is very good. It's meeting the expectations. It's great. C work, good, generally meets the expectations. And we go down from there till you get to kind of the lower end of the range where you think, okay, this is something that the student needs to work on this more. And it's always good when you are creating a rubric to use kind of to use language that's kind of encouraging, that not this failed, but this needs work. This is missing some of the components. To be very clear also about, that this didn't actually meet the requirements that we had. And then you also need to think about what proportion of those marks for that exam are we going to put into each area. So for example, referencing is important, but it's probably not going to carry as much weight as the clarity of concepts or accuracy of expressing a theory. There's not as much of a need for them to show the competency in, let's say maybe you have a component that's creativity. It's nice, it adds something, it gives the students an option to be more creative, but it may not need to carry as much weight. Once we kind of figure that out, we then need to also describe the competence. So if we are talking about clarity of concepts and we're talking about an excellent, kind of exceeds expectation A kind of paper, what what are we looking at here in descriptive terms so that students know exactly what the competence would look like. And then we compute the marks for each based on an overall total marks. And this will be easy for our math folks. So you break it down according to what proportion each area receives, and then also according to percentages. And it becomes really easy. So I'll give you 2 examples here. So this is an example where I've only have one level, one area of competence. I have just described what a really, really excellent reflective assignment looks like for this course. I have kind of given both sides, so both kind of when we as we go down the rubric, kind of I've given both kinds of possibilities, and you know, for not doing as well. So as you kind of have worked with students before, you kind of know a little bit what to expect. And you can create these kinds of, you know, descriptors of each level of competency. And you know that, you know, sometimes a reflective paper doesn't have any conceptual clarity. Sometimes it doesn't have any exploration and it's just giving kind of definitions. So you can start to create a kind of a very clear kind of in behavioral terms what is expected of this assignment. Here's an example of a few areas. So this kind of breaks down the question's answer into more different sections. And so you can see what I have done here is I have made it so that these kinds of 3 areas of competency are worth about, you know, 20% of the total marks. And then I have also referencing, which is only worth 10% of the marks. I have a few other areas. So you can see how it gets broken down. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into groups. And I want you to give a try to create a rubric for the question that you have worked on together. And again, we want to think about what areas of competence are we interested in. That often goes back to learning objectives. We want to think about what levels, kind of what are the levels of competency, what would be an A, what would look like a B, a C, what would look like someone who's failing. Think about what proportion each area needs to have as far as the total overall marks, and try to describe the competence. Now, you may not have much time for, we have about 5 minutes for the breakout groups, so you may not have much time for all the different areas of competence. So maybe focus on one kind of specific area of competence, describe it, and try to think about, you know, what would a really good paper look like? What would each of these kinds of levels look like? Are there any questions before we jump into the breakout rooms? Or thoughts?
There is some chat in the chat about grade, letter grade, rather than a percentages. I think it's by, let me see. Will you speak up?
Yes, so you definitely could give it according to a letter grade as well. You could definitely, if you wanted to. So I have just broken this down. So what I've done is I've broken it down into these kinds of proportions. And when you kind of add the different areas together, you end up getting a range. You know, because not every student is going to be an A in every area. So you can definitely do it according to the actual grading kind of levels that we have here at FC. You can do it according to a percentage. You could do it according to a letter instead of a percentage. These are just examples that I've given.
Are we ready to go to the breakout rooms now? We're going to do that.
So.
Okay, okay. We have 5 minutes, dear faculty. So in 5 minutes, just do a discussion if that's all you can do. but you will have a pretty good idea of the criteria you want for the one question that you decided as a common question for the group. Ji, I think we are back.
Okay. Yeah, so I was only able to step into a few breakout rooms, but it seemed that folks were being quite having a good time and asking some good questions. I think the only thing I just want to say is that creating the rubric is kind of the first step. You really need to test your rubric out because it's you know, a lot of times, oh, I don't have, okay, here we go. A lot of times we realize as we kind of try a rubric that, oh, this needs to change, or I should change that criteria, or I should add this area of competency. So I think the first step is creating the rubric. The next step is testing it out. You know, maybe you have some essay questions that you test on a TA and try the rubric out there. And then I think really important, we want to share the rubric with our students and review it with them because they need to know what is a competent response, what are we looking for. Just even as you finish your semester, if you go on to the next year, next semester, and you want to kind of reuse the rubric, you can, because your essay question or your kind of question might change, but you're still going to probably be evaluating similar criteria because it's all based on your learning objectives of your course. So thanks everyone for participating in this, and I hope that this is helpful.
This was very helpful, both the sessions, except that we stepped danced on Ryan's time. He has only 4 minutes left, but Ryan, please continue because many will stay on. Only some of the faculty that have classes will leave. And I think some of them, a couple have already left. So please, over to you, Ryan, and thank you for your patience.
Dr. Roxana. Really, my portion here was just to give someone an example, and I hope I haven't violated all principles of asking good Socratic questions and coming up with a proper rubric, but I'm going to just give you a brief overview of what I do, and it shouldn't take too long. Let me just share my screen with you. All right, so I've been doing take-home exams for a while now in the MPhil classes that I teach. I never do in-class exams with them for a number of reasons. And some of these principles, I suppose, could be useful for the undergraduate level as well. So some of the basic principles when I do open book exams, they're never objective, fill in the blank, or even short answer questions that require simply a word or a phrase, because that can be easily copied and pasted. But they're conceptual questions, and obviously we've gone through that. Ideally, the students have already been working on this material throughout the semester. So in our MPhil classes, students have to write 6 written response papers where they're already dealing with some of these questions, and the exam helps them to consolidate that. At the upper undergraduate level, this would be relevant as well. And I have students only use class material because otherwise it leads to confusion. It encourages them or tempts them to engage in plagiarism. And the whole point of the open book exam is for them to go back over the material already discussed in class. Happens, there's 2 types of cheating: students copying from each other and students finding external material and copying and pasting it, oftentimes now by replacing synonyms and thereby not getting caught by Turnitin, but it becomes so obvious that it's plagiarized because the English no longer makes any sense. So if 2 exams are extremely similar, my response is that both people who shared it with each other are culpable, and they should both receive an F for that exam. because sharing your exam with someone else is enabling them to cheat. So again, as I mentioned, it's generally pretty simple to find out whether people have copied and pasted from external sources, even if it's not word for word, because they've exchanged synonyms, and that's an F. Let me just see. Yes, and these questions generally, copying and pasting is not something that lends itself to these questions, because they're designed specifically for this topic and for my class, and so there isn't any other material out there that directly matches what I'm asking for. So here is an example from a foreign policy class that I taught in the MPhil level. There was a case study of the Cuban Missile Crisis that we discussed in class. The students have already done reading response papers on this. And so I asked different questions that are really going at different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. The first question is essentially identification and being able to define concepts clearly. And so Graham Allison has these 3 foreign policy models. The second question asked them to apply them to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the third question is asking them to think creatively about a scenario where nuclear war, Khuda na khasta, had occurred, and how would that have occurred according to the 3 models. So it's based in theory. They're supposed to apply theory to a particular hypothetical scenario. And the last question is again a similar one, where I'm asking them to apply a theoretical framework to a particular case study. So that's one example of one open book exam question that I have posed. I haven't displayed the grading rubric, but I'm sure we could come up with one. I also use open book Moodle quizzes, I should say this. But my purpose for them is different. The Moodle quizzes that I use are simply designed to get students to open up their readings, to glance at them. And so I'm not super concerned, okay, there can be some cheating, there can be some laziness, but at least it forces them to open up the book and look up a question that I'm asking, particularly about the reading. These questions are objective. They're not making them apply or define concepts, although sometimes they have to do it in order to understand what the reading was all about. But essentially, the question is designed for them to go to the reading and identify a particular page number and answer the question accordingly. I don't give them a lot of weightage. I give them a little bit of weightage. And I try to minimize cheating by jumbling the question order, the answer order, and also not letting students see the correct answer until after the quiz is closed for everybody. So in that sense, it doesn't eliminate it, but it minimizes it. But again, the point is to get them to crack open their books and their readings and have a look at them. And so here's some examples I give them. So this was something that the course reader said on page 12. And so these examples are very specific, and they have to go there and answer that question. I don't know if any of you would know the question to the answer to the first one. What is the relationship between a politician and a political scientist? I'll let you think about that. And then again, the second question is a true or false question. Again, that students have to go to the page number to find out whether what the right answer is. So that's just an example of what I have done in my classes.
Yeah, Ryan, I think you have put up a very novel idea of using MCQs as letting them do the initial 2 levels, probably, of the first level of Bloom's taxonomy, and then with the open-ended questions like you did with your writing part, essays or whatever. Then if you put the 2 together, you have a pretty good idea of what's happening with the student as such. I think another good thing that one could do is, in case you are double-minded about your research paper or the writing or the project that students do, and you want to double check their competence, and if it's not a totally original question, then perhaps putting it together with a viva or with an MCQ, pairing it and dividing the final exams as two types of exams rather than relying on one. So it's like a validity of either in case there is an issue of a problem. And I think I really loved that example of Cuban crisis that you talked about, and how you took them through different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Thank you so much. We still have 30 of you with us. We are very, very thankful. So if there are any recommendations for future CLG sessions, we will not be having any more in February before your exams, because all of you will be busy in marking and taking exams out for your students. But you will definitely keep us in the loop for any other activity that you want us to do, and that would help you in future sessions. I think online learning is here to stay, and perhaps we will still need to work some more with it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Elizabeth. As always, a great session on rubrics. And Ryan, you have devised very good strategies, so you should be proud of them. You have good experience behind you. And Mavish had to leave for a class, so thanks to all of you.